I didn't know my marriage had already ended when I opened my phone that Tuesday morning. There was no argument, no screaming, no dramatic confession that movies prepare you for. Just one message, a quiet, carefully worded sentence that erased me from my own life. Apparently, those reservations weren't meant to include me anymore. The apartment felt wrong the moment I read it. Too still, too empty. My husband, Victor, had already left the day before with his 2 children, Theo and Miranda. They'd gone to stay with his sister Bethany before their flight. 2 weeks in Europe, Paris, Rome, museums, outdoor cafes, photos at landmarks people dream about their whole lives. I had been counting down the days. I didn't even cry at first. I just opened my banking app. The joint account we shared, our Europe fund, was almost empty. Plane tickets purchased, hotels confirmed, my credit card, my name. Victor listed as a passenger, Theo and Miranda listed, and one more name, Clayton Hutchinson, the man who had disappeared from their lives years before I ever entered the picture. The biological father who suddenly mattered more than the woman who had been there every single day for 8 years. My personal savings account, the one I had built quietly, carefully, alone, was untouched. That money represented stability, survival, a future I had protected without realizing why. I opened my email. Flight confirmations, receipts, passenger lists. I stood by the window watching strangers head to work, moving with purpose, while something inside me finally snapped into clarity. I wasn't angry. I was done. For years, everyone assumed I was just there, reliable, replaceable. The background figure holding everything together while pretending it was love. That morning, sitting alone at the table where I'd planned a vacation I was no longer invited to, I realized something terrifying and freeing. I had been financing a family that had already decided I wasn't part of it. And if I was going to walk away, I was going to do it properly, quietly, legally, permanently. You don't burn a collapsing structure. You dismantle it piece by piece until nothing is left standing on your shoulders. Before everything collapsed, my life looked respectable, not flashy, not impressive by social media standards, but steady, predictable, built on routine and responsibility. I was 36, worked in tile manufacturing, and had been with the same company for 8 years. The job wasn't glamorous. Long shifts, dust cleaning to my clothes, hands that never quite lost the roughness. But it paid reliably. That mattered to me. It always had. I met Victor 8 years earlier, at a time when stability wasn't just a preference, it was a necessity. He was recently divorced, carrying the quiet exhaustion of someone who'd been disappointed by life, but still wanted to believe in something better. His children, Theo and Miranda, were teenagers then, guarded, polite, careful with me in the way kids are when they've learned not to trust permanence. I didn't rush into their lives. I didn't try to replace anyone. I just showed up. School clothes appeared when seasons changed. Winter coats when temperatures dropped. Groceries never ran out. The car kept running even after the transmission failed. When bills arrived, I paid them without comment. When Victor worried about money, I told him we'd figure it out. And we always did, because I made sure we did. We moved into the apartment 5 years ago. Victor's credit wasn't great at the time. He'd shrugged it off, embarrassed, asked if I could handle the lease under my name, just temporarily. I agreed. Conflict made me uncomfortable back then. Being useful felt safer than being difficult. So my name went on everything. Rent, utilities, insurance, phones, subscriptions, streaming services, gym memberships we rarely used. I tracked every expense, every transaction, every automated payment. My father had drilled that habit into me when I was 17. Always know where your money goes. I didn't realize then that I was also documenting my own slow disappearance. Victor proposed 3 years into the relationship. He gave me a ring, a modest one. I said yes without hesitation. Marriage felt like validation, like proof that everything I'd invested, emotionally and financially, meant something. The kids adjusted to calling me family, though never fully. I was there, not theirs. Holidays were cordial, birthdays were polite. Gratitude was implied but rarely spoken. 6 months before the Europe trip, Clayton resurfaced. He showed up at Theo's high school graduation like a ghost, stepping back into the room, acting as if he'd never left, as if he'd been there for school meetings, hospital visits, late-night emergencies. Victor framed it as closure, said the kids needed it, that it was healthy. I didn't argue, but I noticed things, the way conversations shifted, how my presence became optional, how plans were made around me instead of with me, how Victor started saying things like, they just want time with their real dad, as if love were a competition I'd unknowingly entered. I told myself I was being sensitive, that families were complicated, that 8 years of consistency mattered more than sudden appearances. I was wrong. What I didn't see, what I refused to see, was that I'd been placed on probation without being informed. Still useful, still paying, but no longer essential. And by the time I realized it, the decision had already been made without me in the room. The shift didn't happen all at once. That's the part people don't understand when they ask, "Didn't you see it coming?" Of course I saw pieces. I just didn't assemble them into the picture they were forming. It started with small exclusions, conversations that stopped when I entered the room, family group chats I wasn't included in by accident, weekend plans discussed casually at dinner, plans I was apparently expected to overhear rather than be invited into. Victor would glance at me afterward and say, "Oh, I thought I mentioned it." He never had. Then there were the financial assumptions. Expenses increased, but discussions disappeared. New shoes for Miranda, tech upgrades for Theo, hotel deposits, reservations. Everything flowed naturally toward me, the same way it always had. I paid without comment because that was my role, the stabilizer, the buffer, the quiet solution. Clayton's presence became more frequent. Phone calls, texts, sudden updates about his availability. Victor framed it as progress, healing, said the kids were happier, that I should be glad. I tried. But there's a particular feeling that settles in your chest when you realize you're being slowly repositioned, not as a partner, not even as a family, but as a resource, something useful until replaced. One night, I overheard Theo say, "It'd be nice if Dad came on the Europe trip." Not Victor, Clayton. Victor didn't correct him. Miranda nodded in agreement, eyes bright with possibility. Yeah, it's Europe. It should be special. I stood at the sink, washing dishes, hands submerged in warm water, pretending not to hear my own erasure happening 3 feet behind me. Later that night, I asked Victor directly, "Am I going on this trip?" He hesitated. Not long, but long enough. "We haven't finalized everything," he said carefully. "The kids just want some time to reconnect." "With their father," I said. "Yes." "And me?" Another pause. "You understand, right?" he asked. "It's complicated." That was the first time something inside me tightened. Not with anger, but with recognition. The same instinct you get when a structure starts making unfamiliar sounds. A warning you ignore because it's inconvenient. I told myself to wait, to see how things played out. Over the next weeks, my presence became increasingly optional. Family discussions happened without me. Financial decisions were made without consulting me, but always charged to my account. Victor started referring to things as what's best for the kids, as if that automatically excluded me. I started noticing how rarely anyone asked how I was doing, my job, my exhaustion, my sacrifices. It was as if the years I'd spent holding everything together had become invisible, expected, assumed, quietly replaceable. The final seed was planted the morning I woke up early, excited, coffee already brewing, mentally counting down the days until our trip. and my phone vibrated. One message. Short. Efficient. Change of plans. You won't be joining us. The kids decided they want their biological father on the Europe trip instead. No apology, no discussion, no room for response. Just a decision, delivered like a courtesy notice to someone who had never mattered. That was when I understood. This wasn't about travel. It was about replacement. And once you see that clearly, you stop negotiating your place in a life that's already moving on without you. I read the message 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because some part of me kept waiting for additional words to appear, an explanation, a correction, anything that suggested this was a misunderstanding rather than a conclusion already finalized. Nothing came. The apartment was silent in a way that felt deliberate, like it was holding its breath. Victor had left the day before, moving with the distracted urgency of someone already emotionally elsewhere. Theo and Miranda followed behind him, suitcases rolling across the floor, voices buzzing with excitement. No one had hugged me goodbye. No one had said, "We'll miss you." They didn't think they had to. I opened my banking app almost mechanically. The Europe savings, our shared account, was nearly empty. Airline charges, hotel deposits, museum passes, everything processed within the last 48 hours. My credit card, my name, my liability. My personal savings account, 5 years of disciplined restraint, was untouched. That distinction mattered more than I expected. It meant I hadn't been reckless. It meant I hadn't been stupid. I'd been generous. There was a difference. I checked my email next. Flight confirmations. Passenger list. Victor. Theo. Miranda. Clayton Hutchinson, the man I had never met. The man who had vanished from their lives years ago until he suddenly reappeared, conveniently, when something exciting was on the table. My stomach tightened, not with jealousy, but with something colder. Something closer to humiliation. I stood and moved to the window, pressing my fingertips against the glass. Below me, people crossed the parking lot, loading briefcases, sipping coffee, heading into ordinary days that didn't include emotional amputation. My shift started in 40 minutes. Tile manufacturing wasn't exciting, but it was honest, predictable. I'd taken that job 8 years earlier when Victor needed stability, when the kids needed clothes, when someone had to keep the car running, when ambition mattered less than reliability. I turned back to the table and opened my laptop. I hadn't planned to confront anyone. I wasn't even angry yet. I just needed to see the truth laid out without sentiment clouding it. 8 years of financial documentation filled the screen. Every rent payment, mine. Every utility bill, mine. Car insurance for Victor's Mazda, mine. Phone plans, streaming services, subscriptions, gym memberships, meal kits I barely touched. I started listing them, not emotionally, methodically. When I finished, the numbers stared back at me. 42. 42 separate monthly expenses drawing from my accounts like clockwork. 42 obligations that had quietly become assumed, expected. My phone buzzed. A message from Victor. Please don't be upset about this. Clayton wants time bonding with his kids. I know you understand. I typed 5 different responses. Deleted every one. What I eventually sent was simple. Enjoy your trip. 4 words. A period. Nothing else. Then I called my supervisor. Family situation, I said. I need the day off. He didn't ask questions. Approved it immediately. I returned to the table, surrounded by 8 years of proof, and took a breath. I wasn't going to yell. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't going to demand explanations from people who had already made their choice. I was going to do what I'd always done best. Handle it quietly, cleanly, permanently. The coffee went cold as I made the first call to my credit card company. I need to remove an authorized user. No issue with the account? The representative asked. No issue, I said calmly, just streamlining. 5 minutes later, Victor was no longer attached to my finances. Then came the subscriptions. Netflix, Hulu, Disney Plus, Spotify Family Plan. Each cancellation followed the same script. May I ask your reason for canceling? Reducing expenses. By the 5th call, I reached the mobile phone plan. 3 lines. Mine, Theo's, Miranda's. The representative suggested suspending the other 2 lines temporarily. No, I said, cancel them. Just confirming, she replied. This will terminate service immediately. Yes, I said, immediately. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt calm. For the first time in years, something tight inside my chest loosened. Like I'd finally stopped holding up a structure that was never built for me to live in. This wasn't revenge. This was reality, catching up. After the last call ended, I didn't move right away. I stayed seated at the kitchen table, hands resting flat beside the laptop, listening to the low hum of the refrigerator and the distant traffic outside. My breathing was steady. My heart wasn't racing. That surprised me more than anything else. I had expected panic, maybe grief so sharp it would knock the air out of my lungs. Instead, there was clarity, the kind that arrives only after denial has finally exhausted itself. I wasn't spiraling. I wasn't collapsing. I was recalibrating. I stood and walked into the bedroom, opened the closet. My clothes occupied barely a third of the space. Everything else belonged to Victor. Dresses purchased for dinners I'd paid for, shoes that cost more than my work boots, coats worn once or twice and forgotten. I didn't touch a thing. I just stood there, absorbing how much of myself I had compressed to make room for someone else's expansion. How quietly I'd shrunk. Back at the table, the lease documents were exactly where I'd saved them years ago. My name, my signature. Victor's name, nowhere on the contract. I remembered the conversation vividly. My credit's not great right now, he'd said. Could you just handle it? I'd agreed without hesitation, because that's what I did. I handled things, solved problems, made myself indispensable. I picked up the phone and called property management. Grace answered after a few rings, cheerful and efficient. I need to discuss vacating my unit, I said. There was no judgment in her voice. Just process. You're current through next month. Submit 30 days notice and we'll begin showing it. I told her I was relocating for work. That part wasn't even a lie. Not yet. She emailed the form before we hung up. I signed it immediately and sent it back. Done. The phone buzzed again. A message from Theo. Dude, my phone just stopped working. What happened? I stared at the screen for a moment, then typed. The payment plan was under my account. You'll need to set up your own service. The typing indicator appeared. Disappeared. Appeared again. Are you serious? Completely. Miranda messaged next. Same confusion. Same answer. Then Victor called. I let it ring longer than necessary before answering. What exactly are you doing? He demanded, his voice tight, controlled, the way it got when he was angry but needed to sound reasonable. Adjusting my expenses, I said calmly. You disconnected the kids' phones. I disconnected the lines I was paying for. They're adults. This is absurd. We're about to board an international flight. Then you should probably handle that before departure. Silence stretched between us. I could hear airport announcements in the background. You're being childish, he said finally. I'm setting boundaries, I replied. You wanted your authentic family on this trip. I'm giving you exactly that. That's not what I meant. That's exactly what you meant. He started to argue. I ended the call. My hands didn't shake. My voice hadn't risen once. That scared me a little. But it also told me something important. I wasn't reacting out of impulse. I was responding to years of quiet erosion. The rest of the afternoon passed in the same deliberate rhythm. Auto insurance, gym membership, meal subscriptions. Services I'd paid for while taking public transportation to save money. By evening, 42 monthly expenses had been reduced to 11. Only mine. I ordered Chinese food from the place down the street and ate alone at the table, laptop still open, reviewing what remained. For 8 years, I'd been the foundation, while everyone else acted like I was part of the furniture. Useful, unacknowledged, easily replaced. Not anymore. The phone stayed silent that night. And for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like rejection. It felt like peace waiting to settle. The next morning, I woke before the alarm, not from anxiety, but from the unfamiliar absence of it. For years, my mornings had started with a mental checklist of other people's needs. Bills due, expenses coming, schedules to coordinate, problems to preempt before they landed on my shoulders. That morning, the list was gone. The quiet felt strange, almost suspicious, like calm before a storm. By 9, I had already made 3 more calls. The auto insurance agent was someone I'd known since high school. We'd played on the same basketball team back then, before adulthood scattered everyone into separate lives. When I explained I needed to remove a vehicle from my policy, he hesitated. "That's Victor's Mazda, right?" he asked. "You're sure?" "Absolutely," I said. There was a pause on the line. Not judgment, recognition. "Okay," he replied. "I'll process it today. He'll need his own coverage." "That's fine." He didn't ask follow-up questions, just told me he'd email the confirmation. We said goodbye like 2 people who understood more than they were saying. I moved through the apartment slowly after that, noticing things I'd ignored for years. Furniture I hadn't chosen. Decor that didn't reflect me. A space that had never truly belonged to me, despite my name being the only one on the lease. The phone buzzed again. This time, it was Victor. I didn't answer. Minutes later, messages started coming in. First clipped, then increasingly frantic. "You're overreacting. We can talk when we get back. This isn't fair to the kids." I didn't respond. By midday, the escalation arrived right on schedule. Calls from extended family, messages from friends who hadn't checked in for months, suddenly concerned about what was happening. Victor had started explaining the situation, selectively. I could tell by the phrasing. "She's upset. She's taking things too far. We just needed family time." Not once did anyone mention the money, the years, the foundation. Only my reaction. I went back to the table and opened my documentation again. Not because I needed reassurance, but because I needed precision. If this was going to become a conflict, I wasn't walking into it emotionally unarmed. 8 years of records, categorized, time-stamped. I contacted a law office a coworker had recommended, Wagner and Associates. The receptionist transferred me to an attorney named Marcus Keller. His voice was efficient, neutral, the kind that didn't waste time on sympathy. I summarized everything in under 3 minutes. The text, the trip, the finances, the lease. "Are you legally married?" he asked. "Yes, 6 years." "Children?" "His, both adults." "Is the apartment lease solely in your name?" "Yes." "Then you're within your rights to vacate," he said. "If separation proceeds, document everything. Preserve all communication." I already have 8 years of records. There was a brief pause. Approval, not surprise. Good. Call me if he initiates legal action. I hung up feeling prepared. That afternoon, Grace from property management called back. "We already have interest," she said, sounding mildly impressed. "A professional couple relocating for work. They want to view the apartment today." "I'll be there." They arrived precisely at 2. Polite, focused. Asked practical questions, utilities, parking, laundry. They didn't ask why I was leaving. It wasn't their concern. "We'll take it," the husband said before they even finished the walkthrough. Grace smiled. Paperwork was signed that evening. Lease termination. New tenant agreement. Deposit transfer. The apartment changed instantly after that. Not physically, but emotionally. It stopped feeling like a home and started feeling like temporary lodging I had overstayed. I began packing that night. I didn't own much. Clothes, books, work equipment. Everything fit into 8 boxes and 2 duffel bags. Most of the furniture stayed behind. It wasn't mine. Never had been. While packing, my phone buzzed repeatedly. "Theo, Mom says you're being unreasonable." "Miranda, can you please just talk to her?" I sat on the edge of the bed, boxes stacked around me, and typed slowly. I did talk to her. She made her decision. I'm making mine. Miranda, I stared at that word, family, the one I'd been trying to earn for 8 years. "You chose your biological father over the person who's been here every day," I typed. I'm just accepting that. No response after that. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. Victor was escalating through everyone else because he couldn't control me directly anymore. Family pressure, moral pressure, guilt, his usual tools. But something inside me had already crossed a line. Once you stop being afraid of losing people who were already willing to lose you, their leverage disappears. By midnight, everything I owned was packed, and I knew, without doubt, that there was no path backward from here. The darkest moments don't always arrive with chaos. Sometimes they come in stillness. 2 days after everything unraveled, I stood alone in the apartment, surrounded by boxes, the echo of my own footsteps bouncing off walls that no longer felt familiar. The place smelled faintly of cardboard and detergent, temporary, impersonal, like a hotel room after checkout time. Victor and the kids were still in Europe, Paris, Rome, cafes, photos. I imagined them walking through museums I had paid for, smiling into cameras, pretending nothing had shifted beneath their feet. I wondered if Clayton was still with them, or if he had already begun his quiet exit. The thought barely registered emotionally. What hurt more was how easily I'd been erased. 8 years, reduced to a logistics problem. That night, I lay on the mattress with no sheets, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment where I'd silenced myself for the sake of harmony. Every bill paid without acknowledgement. Every discomfort swallowed because I didn't want to be difficult. The realization settled slowly and painfully. I hadn't been loved. I'd been relied upon. Those two things look similar until the moment you stop being useful. The phone buzzed just after midnight. "Victor," I answered. "You didn't have to do all this," he said, voice strained. "You're overreacting." "I'm responding," I said quietly. "You're leaving us with nothing." I laughed softly, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. "You had nothing before me," I replied. "I just stopped pretending it was mine to maintain." Silence stretched. Then his tone shifted, softer, familiar. "We can fix this when we get back." "No," I said. "You can fix your situation. I'm done fixing it for you." He accused me of cruelty, of abandoning the kids, of punishing them for wanting their biological father. That one landed harder than the rest. Not because it was true, but because it revealed how little he understood what he'd taken from me. "I didn't punish anyone," I said. "I stopped financing a life that excluded me." I ended the call and turned off the phone. That night, the weight finally hit. Not anger, grief. For the version of myself that believed love was something you earned through sacrifice. For the woman who thought stability meant staying silent. For 8 years spent building something that never included my name. I cried for the first time since the message arrived. Not loud, not dramatic, just tears slipping down the sides of my face as I lay there, listening to the distant hum of the city, realizing that I was truly alone and that there was no one left to convince. The next morning, I loaded my boxes into a rented storage unit across town, climate-controlled, month to month. The padlock clicked shut with a finality that echoed in my chest. Lighter. That was the word that kept surfacing. Not happier, not relieved, just lighter. I forwarded my mail to a P.O. box 3 towns over, a place called Riverside. A quiet town I'd researched the night before. Affordable, manufacturing work, low rent, no history. I didn't tell anyone where I was going. When I returned to the apartment one last time, I sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd planned a vacation I was never meant to take, and opened my laptop. The joint account was nearly empty. I transferred the remaining balance to my personal account and closed it completely. Clean. Final. Victor called immediately. "You closed our account." "I closed my account," I corrected. "You're free to open your own." "We're married." Past tense. His voice shook. "You're actually serious about this?" He asked where I was going. He accused me of putting them out on the street. "I gave proper notice," I said evenly. "Exactly what I've always done." Then I ended the call. That night, I slept better than I had in years. Because the darkest moment isn't when you lose people. It's when you finally understand they were never holding you, only leaning on you. The turning point didn't arrive with a dramatic revelation. It came with distance. By the time Victor and the kids' plane touched down, I was already gone. Riverside wasn't remarkable. That was the point. A small town with a quiet main street, a diner that closed early, and a manufacturing plant, Bishop Manufacturing, that needed experienced workers. My skills transferred easily. 8 years in ceramics meant I understood production lines, quality control, efficiency. I interviewed once, started the following Monday. I rented a small furnished room above a hardware store, utilities included, month to month, no questions asked. That anonymity felt like oxygen. The first sign that everything was unraveling back home came through social media. Theo posted a photo from the airport, home sweet home, 3 confused emojis beneath it. I didn't react. An hour later, Miranda posted from the parking lot. Why is there a moving truck at our building? I closed the app and made dinner. Eggs. Toast. Simple. Mine. The phone stayed quiet until evening, then exploded. Missed calls, texts, voicemails. Panic disguised as outrage. I let them stack up while watching the local news. Road construction updates, weather forecasts. Nothing that required me. When I finally checked the messages, the pattern was clear. Victor wanted control back. Theo wanted answers. Miranda wanted reassurance. No one wanted accountability. At 9:15 p.m., Victor called from a different number. I answered. "Where are you?" he demanded. "Somewhere else," I said. "The apartment's gone. Our things are everywhere. We can't access it." "Your things," I corrected. "Mine are already relocated." "You can't do this." "I already did." He asked where they were supposed to stay. "That's not my problem anymore." There was a pause, then a confession, slipped out by desperation. "Clayton left," Victor said quietly. 2 days into the trip, said he had work, disappeared. I closed my eyes, not in shock, in confirmation. "So," I said evenly, "the man who abandoned his children once did it again." "Don't be cruel." "I'm being accurate." That was the moment the power shifted. Not because they were suffering, but because the illusion had collapsed. The fantasy that Clayton would step in, that biology would magically replace years of presence, that I was expendable because someone more authentic had returned, Victor pleaded. Asked me to talk, to reconsider, to help just a little. "There's nothing to repair," I said. "You told me I wasn't part of your real family." I agreed. I ended the call. From that point on, everything clarified. Legal notices arrived, motions filed, demands framed as hardship. I forwarded them to my attorney. Each one dissolved under scrutiny. The lease was mine, the notice proper. The kids were adults. I had no obligation to house people who didn't want me present. When mediation was requested, it lasted 30 minutes. Victor asked for support. He received none. Divorce finalized 60 days later without ceremony. By then, Riverside had started to feel real. I had a routine. Clock in at 6, clock out mid-afternoon, coffee at the diner. Evenings quiet. Nobody asked about my past. Nobody expected me to fix their lives. One afternoon, a coworker asked if I had family nearby. "Not anymore," I said. He nodded, didn't push. That restraint meant more than he realized. The true turning point wasn't legal or financial. It was internal. I stopped checking my phone reflexively, stopped bracing for demands, stopped measuring my worth by how much I could carry. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I was done. And for the first time in 8 years, the life ahead of me felt like it actually belonged to me. Not because I had won something, but because I had finally stopped giving myself away. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It came in fragments, messages, legal notices, secondhand updates that drifted toward me like smoke from a fire I had already walked away from. 3 weeks into my new job at Bishop Manufacturing, I received an email from Marcus Keller. Legal notice attached. She's filed a motion contesting the apartment situation and requesting temporary housing support. I opened the attachment calmly, read it once, closed it. Marcus followed up with a second message minutes later. Weak case. The lease was solely in your name. She has no legal standing. I replied with one word. Thanks. 2 days later, the motion was dismissed. The judge's ruling was brief and unambiguous. I held no obligation to house an estranged spouse or adult stepchildren. The lease termination was lawful. Proper notice had been given. Marcus forwarded the decision with a final note. She can try again. It won't succeed. Keep documenting. I saved the email to a folder labeled legal and went back to work. Back home, in the life I'd left behind, everything was unraveling. I didn't need updates. They found me anyway. Theo posted less frequently. When he did, the captions changed. No more excitement, just exhaustion disguised as sarcasm. Miranda's post disappeared entirely. Victor stopped posting at all. A month after their return, Theo sent me a message. I get why you're angry, but this is affecting everyone. Mom had to take a call center job. Miranda's crashing on friends' couches. We had to sell things just to afford rent. Clayton won't respond to anyone. Can't you help, even a little? I read it twice. Then I closed the app without responding. 2 days later, Miranda tried a different approach. A friend request on a platform I barely used. I declined it. Then an email, longer, more emotional. She wrote about misunderstanding, about thinking her father had changed, about not believing I would actually leave. Can we talk? She asked. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. You're adults, I wrote. Your mother made a choice. You supported it. Now you're living with the consequences. That's not my responsibility anymore. Her response came quickly. So that's it? 8 years and you just walk away? I answered without hesitation. You walked away first. I just made it official. That ended the conversation. Victor tried next. Long messages. Apologies threaded with self-pity. Explanations that framed everything as a misunderstanding rather than a decision. Promises to do better, now that there was nothing left to take. I didn't reply. When mediation was requested, Marcus handled it without me present. Victor asked for monthly support. The mediator suggested a compromise. Marcus countered with 0. They settled on nothing. Case closed. By then, Riverside had fully absorbed me. I worked, I ate, I slept. No one asked about my past. No one expected me to cover their emergencies. The diner waitress learned my order. A coworker commented one afternoon that I seemed lighter than when I first arrived. I am, I said. The truth landed quietly. Victor's reputation didn't collapse because I exposed him. It collapsed because the foundation disappeared. Without me paying the bills, managing the logistics, smoothing the crises, everything he had avoided dealing with came rushing in. Clayton vanished. Again. The fantasy died, and everyone was forced to confront reality without a buffer. That wasn't revenge. That was consequence. The final message came 6 weeks later. Victor wrote that he'd made a mistake, that Clayton had disappeared completely, that Theo was working 2 jobs, that Miranda had dropped a class she couldn't afford, that he missed me. I saved the message to the legal folder and didn't reply. Some endings don't need closure. They need distance. The divorce finalized quietly. No courtroom, no confrontation. Just documents sent by email, signed digitally, returned within minutes. Paperwork catching up to a truth that had already been lived. That weekend, I drove to a state park an hour outside Riverside. I walked a narrow trail until it opened to a lake, the surface rippling gently in the wind. I sat on a fallen log and watched the water move, steady, unbothered by what had passed over it before. I thought about the woman I had been 4 months earlier, the one finishing breakfast at 7:15 a.m., opening a text that uninvited her from a life she had paid to maintain. The one who believed love was proven through endurance, through sacrifice, through staying quiet long enough to be indispensable. I thought about the apartment, the bills, the vacations I never took, the family dinners where I smiled for photos while feeling like a guest. And then I thought about the life I had now. Small, quiet, uncomplicated. A job I didn't dread, a town where no one knew my history, a bank account that belonged only to me, evenings that were mine to spend or waste however I chose. I wasn't angry anymore. Anger burns hot, but it fades. What replaced it was something steadier. Clarity. I finally understood the difference between being needed and being loved, between being included and being convenient, between family and dependency. Walking away didn't make me cold. It made me honest. A month after the divorce finalized, I ran into a coworker at the hardware store below my room. He asked if I was settling in okay. Better than okay, I said. He smiled, didn't ask why. That night, I deleted every photo from my old life. Trips, dinners, smiles that had required effort. I kept only one thing, a screenshot of the message that had started everything. Change of plans. You won't be joining us. I kept it not out of bitterness, but as a reminder, not of what I lost, of what I gained by choosing myself. Dignity, peace, a life that actually belonged to me. Sometimes the most powerful thing a woman can do isn't to fight. It's to leave, cleanly, quietly, and never explain herself again.